they can talk to each other. So if I'm at one, I can leave a message on the other one. I've used it to leave a message locally so that if I'm not home and I want to make sure someone got a message, usually you put it on the refrigerator or something like that. We put blackboard on our refrigerator. It's like a contact paper, so you can write chalk on the refrigerator to keep a list of things. And sometimes I'll put a message there. And now I can tell Alexa, and the light will change, and it'll pulse. I think it pulses slightly when there's a message on, so you can get a message off of it and use it as a device. I've not played with Look, which is the one with the built-in little screen, because I've had Alexa since I did the pre-order, so I've had her a long time. And it's one of the few devices outside my phone that gets used regularly. I mean, it's used more than my car. So, that's good.
First come, first serve. The gentleman who I promised this to didn't come today. A tablet, an Asus TF300T. I've upgraded to a different one because this is a little bit slow. So I think it'd be good for
a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, we've had our conversations about it.
Okay, so this doesn't meet Peter's needs?
No.
Okay.
So anyway, if it comes in,
I'm going to his Raspberry today. I'm going to plug
case, charger, even though 16 gigabyte SD card in it, the instruction manual. It would be good for a kid or somebody who's not really demanding to play with. You're welcome to take it with you at the end of the day if the other guy doesn't show up.
All right. Anyone else have anything we want to announce, share, or ask before we get started with the meeting? Nope.
Well, as usual, I'm still making my inroads in the tech community, so if anybody's got anything they got their ear to the ground and they hear anything, please let me know.
Are you on DC Slack? There are easily a dozen. This week there are easily a dozen posts. A dozen jobs. So I would definitely get on because I've been forwarded to friends. Is your LinkedIn profile up to date?
It's been updated, yeah. I have my resume all set and ready to go.
So definitely have, because LinkedIn, I get 3 or 4 messages with at least a dozen jobs a week. I don't know if they're any
well, that's the issue, right? But generally, in IT, it's very, very hard to find qualified people. Meaning to find people that has experience to a certain degree with whatever they're hired to do. It's amazing how long it takes to find people at all in this industry. So yes, I'm like Rick. I get pinged many times a week with odd jobs all over, and they don't necessarily read the resume. They just say, you're an IT person, let's see if there's any hit. But if you have any specific skills, particularly if you're contributing to open source or something else where you can basically say in your resume, go ahead and see how good I am, do it. I mean, don't hold that back. Make sure you put it out there out in front.
Yeah, so everybody now, if you're doing anything, you should probably have, in the tech community, you should probably have a GitHub page, and you should have your scripts, your code, whatever you're doing there for people to review. It's pretty much becoming a default for us as part of the screening processes. You're going to send us your GitHub page when we go through your projects and see what you've contributed to, what you've written, what you've done. So there was a person I was talking to just out of one of the boot camps in DC, and she shared her GitHub page, and we looked through it, and we're like, it does exactly what it's supposed to do, well formatted. I mean, it's hard to say it's schoolwork, but at least it gave us an idea of the person's style, some of the things that they paid attention to. So it was a good first blush. In the old days, it was very hard. I was talking to someone, I remember when this, I guess it came up yesterday at lunch. Someone was talking, we were talking about old jobs in the area and some of the employers, and I talked about here in Tyson's when AOL was here back in the late 80s, and I was going to interview with them, and they're like, well, you need to send us some of your source code. I said, so this is 89, And I said, I work for the government, so they own the source code, I cannot send it. Well, if you can't send any source code, we can't, decide what to do. And I said, well, what if I worked for you and I was going to apply someone, they wanted to see source code? What would you say if I took your source code and shared it? Oh, we'd sue you, blah, 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 blah. And I said, well, I'm a little bit more afraid of the government. Like, yeah, well, if you won't share your source code, I'm not going to hire you. So that was my first failed foray at AOL. The second one was in 94, 93, and I went to interview with them, and they said, you need to take a 70% pay cut to come here, but we're going to give you stock options. And I said, okay. Last time I checked, I can't pay my mortgage with stock options, and I need to pay my mortgage. So this is the minimum. Like, yeah, but you get stock. And I'm like, yeah, well, stock doesn't pay bills, so thank you very much. That said, I did get a friend to go at that time, and he went to work for them, and he worked there from 93. No, he didn't retire. He worked there from 94 until 2013. So he worked there almost 20 years. Yeah, almost 20 years. And he's a Comcast now. He survived the last round of but yeah, so those were some of those tech stores. So I think we were probably close to a quarter after. Yep, good timing, which is usually when we try to start. So with that, Jack has, you'll see him posting on the list on a pretty regular. He has spoken a couple of times. He had given a Raspberry Pi and Kite in the past, probably about 2 years ago, I want to say now, if memory serves. And he volunteered to give another talk. The only other thing I'll mention before he gets going is around that time, or slightly after the time, was when the FAA was going to start, or did start instituting, the no-fly zone, and you had to register and all of that. And then, so everybody hopefully saw within the last month. That's no longer the case, and if you actually paid your $5 or whatever, you can get your money back. So anybody who has a drone, who did register, made a fee, or paid the fee, there is now a form to get your fee back if you want to get that back from the FAA. So, with that, I will turn it over to Zach to talk to us about the Raspberry Pi and kites. Cool.
Okay, so the first thing to note is that there's an S here. Just don't type the S. If you go to http://kite.zaxi.info, you'll get to the right page. That's because of a weird Verizon bug, which I will get to in the end of the talk. But I have all of the slides, all the valid links, everything on my webpage. So, including this presentation, so it's pretty good. So, this is what I like to do, particularly when I'm on vacation. This is all a hobby. What I do is I take a platform like the one that you saw previously. This one's wooden. This one was paper, but you still fly it high up on a kite. You can take pictures of the ground, which is actually pretty fun. So it's a good hobby. There's one of the reasons why I do this is because of the fact that in BC we are very restricted with the airspace. And last I checked, UAVs are still prohibited in the area, but it's not. It's now the 20 miles, like 35 mile zone. I think now it's like a 5 mile zone. So it's really more sort of like within the beltway where you can't fly UAVs compared to previously. But it's all good. So the pictures here are basically saying this is just a fun hobby. I did it when I flew kites when I was a kid, which is can't really tell from this photo, but from the projector. But it was a lot of fun. and that's me more recent. There's a book called Eyes in the Sky by Dino Bongini, which is actually a very interesting look at sort of the history of aerial photography, particularly looking at the sort of CIA/Air Force attempts at early satellites. If you're at all interested, it's a fascinating read because in addition to the satellites, they talk about other ways that people were looking down at the ground and trying to gain that perspective of what's on the ground from a high vantage point. So it's a good look. One of the other reasons why I wanted to do this was I wanted to keep my job while doing some sort of aerial photography inside of DC Special Flight Rules area, which is basically the only way you can get an aerial platform in the air would be with a kite. The balloons, ultralights, commercial air, UAVs, drones, all prohibited, but kites still work, and kites also work in the national park as well, with some exemptions, but not quite as many exemptions as UAVs. So, in order to keep my job, kites are not a bad option. Most people don't care about kites. So the next thing is that this is my sort of personal attempt at doing this. This is actually a National Geographic photo. The viewer's wondering what that over is doing. The way that I've been doing this is not exactly standard within the kite aerial photography community. Basically, they have a different way of doing it so that they're not using as many sensors as I am to take photos. They're also using a Picoche type thing to lift the kite. Essentially what that means is that it's a very stable platform. For me, I'm doing it a completely different way because doing what they were trying to do sort of made my brain hurt. So instead I'm doing something a little bit more simpler, which has its own challenges, but that's where things get fun. So here we go. So I'm using a Raspberry Pi. I'm using a Raspberry Pi Model A+, which you can get from Adafruit, and I'm not sure there's actually too many other places where you can get it at the moment. This is the Raspberry Pi model that has the least power requirements. There is also the Raspberry Pi Zero, Raspberry Pi Zero W, which offer similar capabilities. They're actually the $5 and $10 versions of the Raspberry Pi. The issues with those is a sort of a subtle one. In addition to paying $5 for the camera cord, which is actually more than the Pi itself, the camera cord is very prone to breaking because they had to change the dimensions of the cord to make it fit the board. So something in there is a little bit wonky, and a lot of people have had issues trying to connect that correctly. So I would just stick with the A+. That just seems to generally work. So in addition to the Pi, you need the camera. In addition to the camera, you need a power pack. Power pack you're looking for needs to be reasonably good. There's a couple of different definitions of good. Basically, the ones that you get at Micro Center for $5, you'd want to tend to stick away from those. But like if you go up to the $15 range, you should generally be fine. It's sort of like, basically the cheaper ones really aren't giving you 5 volts, they're giving you closer to 4.5 volts, and their amperage is a little bit lower than what the Pi is actually expecting. So if you go for the slightly more expensive option, and I think this one I got at Best Buy, whatever price point that was, those work. So it's just something to keep in the back of your mind that you may have to experiment a little with the power packs to actually make the thing work too. And you need the sense, for me, I needed the sense hat. The sense hat is this white board, which is actually on top of the Raspberry Pi. That, in addition to the white part, is actually LCDs or LEDs, which you can't actually see while you're outside, so that's fine. But in addition, it has a bunch of sensors on it. It has acceleration, so you know if you're swinging in various directions quickly. It has a temperature and barometric sensor on it. The temperature and barometric sensor, you can actually figure out how high off the ground you are, because air is more dense lower to the ground, and it's less dense higher to the ground. So you can actually see that I took this photo 50 feet off the ground, that type of thing. So that's the reason why I need that. You also need an SD card, but those are cheap. So it's not exactly the cheapest type of platform to use, but it's a hobby. So in addition, you need to have a kite rig. Essentially, this is the actual piece here that you can hold on to, and it will lift up with the kite. It really is a variable cost. At one point, I was looking at, and I'll show you photos here in a second, having acrylic based platform that was rigid and would go up with the kite, and basically super glued things on. It works until you have a bad landing, and then it cracks, and then it breaks into a million parts. You also need to have the actual kite itself. You need to have the large gauge wire. This is that portion of it. So what this allows you to do is to essentially, if my finger here is a kite rope, just sort of wrap it around, and then wherever the kite rope goes, this goes. It seems to work reasonably well. Nail polish is if you're using acrylic, that sort of super glues things together, so that the bolts that you attach to the acrylic doesn't move, because otherwise bolts will sort of unscrew if they come under a lot of force. So a lot of little tricks I picked up around the way, and depending on what you're doing, you can spend a lot of money on it. This wooden thing here I picked up at a craft store, and I used some metal wire, which is less than the width of the mounting holes, so I was able to just attach everything together. I'll show you some of the other rigs I have. Here's a Code 1 version 1. This is a cron job essentially, which would just every second take a photo, or every minute take a photo, because it was a cron job. And that was not a bad approach. I did have a platform. This was essentially a piece of poster board, and I just really zip tied everything together. And it worked until it broke, and I didn't have a code backup. Basically, what happened was this plastic piece here sort of ripped off, and then this whiteboard sort of went flying and somewhere over the ocean now. So this is also where code backups come into play, because I didn't have code backup. But so this is the second version. This was done on an acrylic platform. I learned how to laser cut, which was interesting. And I bought screws to securely attach the platform. There was a company out of Maine, I think, that I used for that actually manufactured the M1 and the M1.5 bolts to screw everything together, which would match the Raspberry Pi spec for looking at the circuit board to see what they needed to actually secure everything. They're really tiny. They're not too expensive. You buy it in bulk. I think like I ended up spending $40 for all of the various sizes to have nuts, bolts, and a little washer. And to have 100 of each of those pieces. So it's good. So the other thing I added was if found, please call sticker. So hopefully if it was found, people would give a call. Because yeah, if this was going over the ocean, I wasn't sure what was going to happen. And it did actually work. This was in Manassas. It was the first time that I took a photo of the ground. This was actually in a park. The little blue dot on the right here was my wife. So it was actually pretty cool. That was actually the day that we sort of decided that we're going to be moving to Manassas. So, a little bit of history. Platform 3, I decided to rewrite the code so I could take into account the sensors. Basically checking to see if we're shaking, we should take a photo or not. And I should also say that this is something that I've done for the past 5 years now. So there is a little bit of history as to how everything was doing here. One of the things that my wife wanted to do was to suggest that I have an enclosure so that if it were to, because of the second version, everything was exposed, I should have an enclosure so if something were to break hard, like the electronics might get damaged. Well, we weren't expecting the actual platform itself to get damaged by hitting the ground really fast and breaking into 1,000 parts, because I was using an ultralight kite, which was for 0 wind velocity. It was flying. The issue was that the wind turned quickly and the kite decided to do a dive bomb into the ground, and so did the platform. And you can't really see it super well there, but like there's essentially this part here of the platform is missing. This corner here is broken off. And there's also a sharp incision right here. So hoping no one got hurt at the playground I was trying to play at, but we'll see. So this was the platform that I showed you before. This one was made out of paper stock with the idea that, well, maybe this will be more reusable than the acrylic one, or at least we'll be able to handle crashes better. It sort of worked. It did stay together for a flight, but this whole portion here was actually ripped out. The only reason why it was staying up was because the metal wire that was actually wrapped around by the power cord, that was actually providing enough tension to allow the whole thing to rise. So I had to throw out the power cord once I realized that happened. So lessons learned and sort of figuring out how to do things better. This did work well. The only issue that I had was sort of the white balance. This is actually a feature of the camera. Basically what they're trying to do is figure out the correct white balance based on different portions of the sky, and depending on how you're looking at the sky can have a different white balance. Because fortunately, it's one of those things where you eventually learn white balance is hard. So was able to get a couple of nice previews. I did write my first Python code. So one of the things that I found out was that by doing the cron job, it was really sort of guessing as to when the camera should take a photo. Guessing and taking photos of something when you're in a very dynamic environment really isn't the best option. So I needed something better. So I wanted to check to see when things were shaking, and there is actually a shaking equation which I'm going to show you in the next slide, which is if you can grab two accelerometer positions very short together, see if there's a wide vector between when you're taking the photo and not, or between the two times that you check the accelerometer sensors, you can sort of see if you're shaking or not by doing some math. And that's on the next slide. But in addition to that, we can also record the temperature, barometric pressure, and humidity of the sensor. And the reason why you want to do that is if you know the barometric pressure and sensor, and the barometric pressure and the temperature at ground level, and if you know the barometric pressure and temperature at a higher level, you can get the elevation of the sensor at that time. And that's a way of saying, at this time I took a photo and it was 50 feet off the ground. And say that actually that, I think this photo, this photo on the right here, that was 75 feet off the ground. And also the code is available on GitHub. So how the shake detectors work is I basically grab a vector of the accelerometer data, basically two calls directly after each other. And if you take the difference between x1, the first sensor reading and the second sensor reading, do a subtraction and square it, then take the square root of it for all of the x, y, and z axes. You remove the sine component of your difference, and that means that you'll have a value of relative shakiness between 0 and a large number. Because if it's 0, that means that your object is just not moving. If your value is huge, like 100, that means either in the x direction you really were downward moving quickly, or y doing something like that. It's just it's a way of sort of normalizing whether a object is shaking or not. I did not write this formula, but it makes sense. I do have a reference to it in the GitHub as to the actual source of it.
We're just going to close the bracket for what it's worth.
Oh yes, I will make a note of that. And I will be giving this talk actually next week at the Raspberry Pi Jam in Bethesda, Maryland, which is unfortunately sold out. But if you haven't got tickets already, but yeah, I will make a note about that.
One reason I noticed is I was trying to figure out if the square root was of each value or was the whole thing, and I saw the opening bracket in it.
Yep. Yeah, it's supposed to be for the whole thing. Yeah, magic happens, math is hard, but that works. The other way that and basically because of the fact that it could be a while to detect when when the camera is stable or not. We have a decrementing counter from 1,000, and if that counter gets to 0, we just take a photo anyway, just be done with it. So it's a loop that eventually, hopefully, we'll get a photo. Even if not, if it's not perfect, it'll be close enough. And when I was taking, last time when I took the photos, I think I set the value wrong, because there was actually times when I thought that I shouldn't be taking a photo. So I adjusted the code to reduce the threshold by 0.2, so now it's a little bit less. So hopefully the next couple of times I take photos, we'll either be taking photos because the timer ran out, or because it's the right time to take a photo. So this is sort of explaining the barometric pressure thing, which was mentioned earlier, on how you can get elevation. So elevation is, so I was actually at one point casually looking into becoming a pilot, and this was actually one of the slides they had. They sort of talked about, well, air pressure gets lower, or air pressure, you have more air pressure at the ground as compared to when you do when you're at altitude. And that was how a lot of the early altimeters are made, is essentially you have a very accurate barometric sensor inside the plane. You have a very accurate barometric sensor on the ground at the airport, and you can basically just do math, and it will allow you to know how close you are to the ground. You have to basically, because of the fact that because air is essentially a liquid, and it's always moving and changing, while we really don't perceive it unless there's like a storm going by. The air pressure is always changing, and so there will be differences between the ground and there will be subtle differences over the course of the day as to if the air pressure is rising or falling. If you have something really close in time, you can get an approximate value, and approximate in this case is good enough for them. And if it's good enough for pilots, it's good enough for me. And this is actually how, it's how things work, and that's actually the other reasons why the FAA invented all of these other methods of getting a plane to land correctly when it's stormy, because you start having all these issues. So that's where instrument flight ratings come in. You have to be able to, basically using radar and other sensors, being able to fly the plane into the correct spot on the runway. It's a reasonably hard challenge. I wish I wasn't quite so claustrophobic, but that's the other reason why I like kite flying, because I don't get claustrophobic. So photo sensors are, so the photos with this platform is still pending at this point. While there was a couple of days of wind, at least when I was trying to fly the kite, it wasn't consistent enough for the kite sensor to become aloft. You really sort of have to have the wind blowing against your ears at a consistent rate, so that essentially you can hear the wind sort of in your ears constantly, because kites really sort of need to have the constant pressure of moving password for the kite to maintain the height. So it's sort of a little bit beyond, if you see a tree moving back and forth, it really sort of has to be constant. However, with that, I did take it out twice, and as you can see, it's still together. And then charge into a million pieces. So hopefully this will be a better platform. Because getting a platform that I don't have to rewrite every year, this is going to be a good win in the end.
So the form factor you have in there, is that because of the kite? The size of your box, or was it just something you found?
This was just something I found that happened to be very light. The other thing was that I've been trying all of these other things, and they were all hard and they all have their own issues when the storm crashed. This has crashed twice so far and it's still okay. So, cross fingers. So I do recommend a Delta kite, and if you are super curious, I can set it up in my car when we leave. Essentially, it's just a big triangle. It has a very rigid structure, and the reason why you want to have the rigid structure is that it's just super fast to rise when there's a good wind. The disadvantage of that is that you actually have to have enough space in your car for the kite. So it's not. I used to have a smart car, and this would barely fit in the trunk. So I ended up getting the Subaru last almost 2 weeks now. So now I'm better on that front. However, it'll still be a little bit hard to take the kite on a plane, just because you'd have to somehow get it into your suitcase and make sure that it doesn't break with baggage handlers handling the bag. So it's not exactly a perfect solution either, but it's closer to what you want. So now let's talk about safety rules in the DC area, as well as laws and all this other stuff. So this was a proposed DC special flight rules area. Originally, the blue area was going to be where everything was applied. It's now actually going to only be the red area. The red area is where UAV flights is strictly prohibited. Blue area is where you can fly a UAV, but you must do 50 other different things in order to actually fly correctly. And essentially, because of the fact that laws were just getting too darn complicated, I want to do something a bit easier. Because of that, one of the advantages. Yes.
What's that strange little corner piece up there?
That's the Leesburg Airport. And there's also, like, this arrow is where I am. Red arrow is about where we are. The DC is right there. And there's little cutouts in here and here for 2 other airports are sort of right on the edge where, like, you have to do everything correctly, and you still have to follow a special flight plan in order to fly there, but it's a little bit less stringent than the flying into DC Brighton. It's a legal nightmare. Now, one of the interesting things about this was that within the DC Special Flight Rules area, they explicitly permitted the use of kites. This was an amendment to the law that also allowed people to sled on the Capitol Hill. So we'll take it. And the FAA actually encourages you to bring your kite, but leave your drone at home. So, okay, I can do that. So not this year because it's already passed, but hopefully next year, particularly as this seems to be a stable platform, I'm going to see what I can do in the early morning to see if I can grab a picture of the cherry blossoms if it's a windy day. Now, there is some caveats with actual flight laws. So they actually do have a bunch of them, which I removed these slides for. Summarize: if there's a sign that says "Don't fly a kite," don't fly a kite. The only place where I actually saw this caveat was at Gravelly Point, which is right under DCA, the Reagan National. If you go onto Amazon, they do have a kite rope which is way beyond 500 feet. Try to make sure that your kite actually stays under 500 feet. You probably won't run into issues, but probably want to be on the safe side of the law. But most likely people won't care unless for some reason they do. So the other thing is that check the NOTAMs and other legal guidance from the FAA as to whether or not you can actually fly your kite. NOTAMs are notice to airmen, and basically what they say is that, like, particularly during special events, they say don't fly here. These are for like when there's a baseball game happening, when there's a Super Bowl happening. All of these are things where they just sort of prohibit everything for like a period of time. If you're going to be doing something, if you were to just check the day before, it's not a bad practice to have. If you're going to be flying at night, they actually do sell kite lights, where essentially it's just a big strobe that you attach to your kite and they can fly it at night and people won't care. I haven't done that yet, but I'm going on vacation soon. There's also on your iPhone or on your Android a Before You Fly app. It's designed for UAVs, but it's also good just to give you the general guidance as to if you should be flying your kite or UAV at a given point. They also have links to the NOTAMs, the other legal things that you do want to check just to make sure that everything is okay before you fly. Again, it's something that I would consider a best practice, but not everyone's going to follow it. But if someone comes by and obviously tells you to take your kite down, take your kite down. The other thing is that I found out was there are national parks that do prohibit kites. This one in particular that's close by to me is the Manassas Battlefield. While they do have a kite day, most of the time they don't want you to fly kites because of the fact that it would be disrespectful to the people that fought there. That makes sense. So if you're going to be doing stuff, this is just a good thing to check the laws for any given day, cross your fingers, and if someone comes by saying, hey, stop doing that, stop doing that. Also, the very first slide where I had the upside down birds, they actually have different experiences they had in different towns and that type of stuff too, if you want to go into that. Okay, so here's a bonus slide that I'm going to talk to for just a second. So Verizon is a wonderful infrastructure, but they decided to make it so that your FiOS IP address is now a DHCP address that changes weekly. So you can't easily have a server running there where you statically point your domain to a particular address. So I'm trying to come up with a way of coding so that I can dynamically say the main host is here, but then we will redirect you to my actually hosting behind my Verizon FiOS where I don't have to worry about any of the charges. Yes?
You're done. This is DNS, DNS.
Yes, but those are blocked from work, or at least where I work. So I don't want to try to. There might be I know the Dying DNS is. I'm not sure about the other ones.
The Duck DNS I've been using for a decade.
Okay.
So you may want to look at, that's an easy way. I didn't realize Verizon had started messing around with stuff.
They did as of last week.
Okay.
Like or like maybe for the past 2 weeks, because like I remember doing it like.
Yeah, basically what I do is I just have some domain that's hosted by Laundry, and I just have a CNAME, and the CNAME is managed by DNS, and that's full script concept.
Yeah. That
Everything
is
caches, basically.
cool. That is what I'm aiming. That's what I'm aiming for. I was trying to figure out a way of doing it all over HTTPS. This works over HTTP, but not over HTTPS, which is actually something I have to fix for myself. So there's a lot of little unexpected gotchas I'm going to have to address, essentially. What I did do, which seemed to work okay for HTTP, is to forward with a 302 path to a subdomain under my own domain system, which then, as long as I had a name server record for the subdomain, it would actually forward correctly, but it didn't work for HTTPS. But otherwise, yeah, essentially was like the duck DNS where I croned up. Magically, the IP addresses would change. But I'm not sure. The HTTPS is actually an issue because I am using Let's Encrypt on the client side to make everything work. So I'm hoping, excuse me, that with almost minimal code change, I can get things to work. And on a good day, that's a barcode that would take you to the presentation if you're fine. And that's sort of it. Is there sort of any questions at this point? Yes.
I'm back to the enclosure thing.
Yeah.
So have you tried the standard dump 3D printed box or something else like that and plug
I
it into
don't
that?
have access to a 3D printer, but that should work.
Because what I'm thinking is if you can make a box that closes with screws or something else, then the box might break, but the stuff inside of it shouldn't get lost.
The issue with the 3D printer was just that I didn't have access. So I should be able to get access to one, but I have no idea. Yes.
I was kind of thinking maybe another idea might be to use spray foam and hot lime. Like that spray insulation foam you spray into a wall to seal like the air drafts. Sometimes you can cut it down and build your own enclosures out of that. It's foam, it bounces.
That's a good idea too.
Super cheap.
Yeah, the joints where everything needs.
That's a good point. I'll look into that. That's cool. Yes, no, if not. Yep.
Can you speak up?
Yep.
How does it hang from the road? He wasn't here to see the enclosure.
Yes. Well, we can fix that. So we just sort of wrap this in here. My thumb wasn't through the photograph. Now there is a lot of shape. I usually go with the sensor and compared to I just and if you have, if I really want to, I can put my on this.
So after normal hours, after five.
And the number on the card, that's your mobile. Okay, thanks, I appreciate
This is like a perfect opposite. Yeah.
You don't catch the corner of your positive camera, or it's facing out.
Yeah.
So
this is okay. And that's so that so we've got having right out this way. Yeah, basically, you have enough things that compare to wings or ears, and as long as there's that,
They still let you fly kites on the national mall?
so far.
Well, they have kite days.
Yeah.
Yeah, they haven't seen sun in the past.
Well, but yes, right on the mall is where they have kite day.
So right now, yes, you don't. They've done a couple of motorcycles.
Is there any height limit for that?
The height limit in the US is 400 feet,
It's
but
just no different.
yeah. So some different numbers.
how high have you ever gotten kite?
The highest that I measured it was, I think, 280. That's just because the wind was sort of very directional that day.
Can you say something about, you were going to put an accessory lens on their camera? Can you say something about that?
You can attach an accessory lens.
What is it?
They basically offer two different types. One is a widescreen, or the wide angle, so you have to catch more on the ground, or it could be telescoping, so it'd just be a closer image to the ground.
That's a pie camera? Or what?
It's still a pie camera.
So it's a digital telescope.
If you're attaching something, it would be optical. The Canon camera that I was going to think of attaching additional, that would be optical, but that would be just a regular Canon camera with essentially a script to every 30 seconds take a photo.
You say a Canon camera, right?
It's a Canon point-and-shoot camera. So,
Pretty big camera.
yes, but it's light enough so that it will still go up. Like, you are allowed to attach up to 50 pounds to a kite. That will still be legal within the U.S. and otherwise need permission. So you could, so people do attach really expensive DSLR cameras to kites. I personally think that's a little bit too much, just because there's so many things that could go wrong for that expensive amount. But people do it, and they take great photos with it. Yes.
You did a great job of covering the legalities of where to do and all that, but I wanted to just point out the little cutout areas that you asked about. Those are the terminal control areas, different airports in the area, and there are special restrictions over and above that there. Hardly a week goes by that some low IQ individual doesn't park a drone in the glide pad one of the local airports, and somebody has to go out and shoot them off. It is a felony to interfere with the flight of an aircraft at any time, but in the terminal control area, the penalties are accelerated. So generally a really bad idea to be in any of those areas, even though on the map it actually shows them being cut out because it's even worse.
Excellent.
Another problem in the national mode is like even if you are literally far from the airport,
Yeah.
there are so many helicopters around, and you don't even know them, and they can go there anytime. So be careful with that.
I do personally have like a bunch of different safety things I attach to the kite. So I have the long streamers so it becomes more visible. I have strobe lights actually, which I attach to the questionable day. So I do understand and share those concerns. Yes.
So one of the things that you can do with a normal quadcopter or something like else is to actually broadcast the video to your receiver. And that way all the issues of should I take a picture or what sort of can be done on the ground. Is that something you're looking into, or is that too much power?
It's something that I'm aware of. That's just not something that I've tried to do. At this point, let's see if I can get this platform to be reusable, and I'm going to slowly expand what the capabilities of this platform. Like I do have at this point a code that will essentially write a web page that says this is the latest picture that I took. That's literally all I have at this point, as far as sort of like remotely sensing what photos are being taken or something. So, like at one point I was thinking, this could be a great web app, and then I realized actually the hardware is too hard at this point. So let me focus on that.
I wonder if the distance is going to be a problem also, because the Wi-Fi dongle is really small, so I don't know if you have enough range.
There's a special receiver broadcasting you use for that. Otherwise, you couldn't do it. I mean, really, this is used for quadcopters where you have some kind of face mask in front of you where you have the screen, and you can fly the thing miles away from you and you can still broadcast. But yes, it needs batteries like this little more when you do that. But yeah, you wouldn't do the whole Wi-Fi. No.
Yeah.
Are you inserting the sensor data into the EXIF data of the JPEGs?
No, I'm writing it into a separate log. So each time that I take a photo, I basically say, okay, this was the temperature, this was the iteration, this was like the yeah. But that's all in a text file, just because of the fact that while I could do that with the original image, for some reason I'm not entirely sure why it doesn't uniformly write out the JPEGs until a certain point, sort of after the camera has been shut down. So it's a little bit weird, and I don't want to. So I'm writing it to separate files at this point. It seems to be okay. That is a whole different issue as to why the images aren't being written out. I think it's just because I don't have a good way of shutting down the camera. It does have the keyboard interface on it. I should actually. That will be going into as a GitHub issue at some point. Because the nice thing about the Sense app is that it does have a little joystick control, and I can trap for those events. Thanks. I'm not sure how on startup. I know that I can log myself in as a user. I'm not sure if I can automatically start a program using the console when there isn't it. But magic there, but hopefully. And then but yes, I was aware that I could do that with the JPEG EXIF information. I have not tried to do that.
You can always shut it in afterwards too.
Yep. Because the other thing I was thinking of actually was because of the fact that running a GPS takes a lot of power. I was thinking of before the flight using my phone's location to save to the log file where the location of the camera is before the flight, and that way I know the altitude up, but I don't really know the drift. Now it would be nice to start doing all these things, but all these things require power, and I'm not sure where the boundaries of the power would be too. So, more to come? I don't know. Yes?
If you're holding the kite with a string anyway, couldn't you just use a microfilament and feed it power that way?
Yes.
So then you'd have unlimited power, you can have the battery, and if you had like a
Kind of heavy wire, isn't it?
Yeah.
from the
Yeah. I was unaware of that light type of wire, but yes, that could be possible. I will be honest also and just say that trying to fly the kite in this area regardless is sort of hard just because you don't really have constant winds. I haven't been able to quite experiment to figure out everything that I really wanted to. What I might, because after talking with coworkers, I might try to attach a solar balloon to the kite to get the initial lift up so that I can sort of go up into the higher atmosphere. But that's, at this point, this is I'm wondering if this is possible, not knowing that this is possible. And so, yeah, there's a bunch of things on the wish list. But yeah, that would be a cool thing if I could, if that happened. Like, if you send me an email with a link to the wire that you know about, that would be great. We can definitely look and figure out what happened. Because the other thing is that unlike, we do know that the maximum distance is about 500 feet. So we could then sort of say, okay, given the power droppage over this long of a weight, how much we could actually have and what is still working on. Interesting thought. Any sort of other questions at this point? Now, this is just a fun hobby for me, so I'm really happy everyone's sort of here and listening.
Well, thanks for sharing.
Well, thanks, Adam.
So yeah, I mean, these are a type of talks that I find interesting. People, Wayne is doing something with cameras in his Raspberry Pi to be able to do watch his house or something. I can't remember the full specifics. He's having some issues getting it to move properly, getting the step motors to move properly. So I've been answering some of those questions. But the idea is I'm hoping that when people see and hear these things and they think, let's solve a problem. I think one of the first ones that Zach gave was around podcasts and tagging them or something.
It was automatic podcasting. So essentially what it was that we had a Perl meeting and I didn't want to take the time to edit the podcast afterwards. I just wanted to have it so that I would press one button and it would sort of publish itself. And I got to the point where it worked, and then I moved, and so I haven't really done that.
But it's the type of thing where, one of the things that you talk about in the open source is, scratch your itch, right? So there's some problem that you need to solve, and I look at Zach and Doug specifically as solving those problems and sharing that information. Now, the one thing I will notice is the similarity between Zach and Doug, and I think this is true for Zach, I know it's true for Doug, is, he has any children. His daughters are his children.
That's true.
And
Doug has dogs and a few other things that takes up his day, but yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't have, so what it boils down to for anybody who has children, they're just a huge money suck. It never goes away. As my daughter's heading off to college, my son's now 21 in New York City and has been relatively supporting himself for 2 years now. But there are occasionally those conversations that happen.
their funds are not flowing as they should.
Kids are not raised until they're 30.
That when it's 30? Well, so I was
That's
thinking
from a social worker.
in the next 2 years, when we move and not be before the address. When all of a sudden the cell phone stopped working because I'm no longer paying for the service, that's when.
For example, let's say your 34-year-old son gets divorced and moves back home.
Yeah, it's actually, there was an excellent article around that, sometimes this year, or probably a couple months ago. And it was talking about how in America, I think blended family is the right word to use, but the multi-generational family outside of America is the way of life, where America is not. Although with over the last decade, the number of people, and I know a lot of people whose kids have graduated from college and have moved back home. I did live at home for about 6 months while I was moving between 2 houses and having a house built. That was a different situation. But yeah, the working, that was one of the friends was saying their kid had moved back home, and they were distraught and different things, and they said, well, they pay rent. Well, I'm like, they should be paying rent. I said, they're staying in your house. I said, now, if you want to take that money and use that as a forced savings plan that you give back to them when they leave, you want to use it for whatever, but at least there is now a different relationship. Because I remember coming home from college, and it was different than when I lived under the house rules. Plus then, when you're 18, you were actually an adult who could do all the things that you can't do now until you're 21 or older. But yeah, just setting up sort of, it wasn't punitive or anything like that. It was just like, this is the relationship. This is, you come and go as you need, but here are the rules of the house. And that didn't work. And that person was like, yeah, I never even thought about it that way. So I had not talked to them and see if they've instituted that. But what I always, with the hobbies and the ideas and whatnot, Doug had brought in his Phantom. I think it was a Phantom drone. It was whatever the $1,000 drone is, or $995 drone, and shared those. So anybody who has those ideas, and people, unfortunately, they got blank on the guy who left, a Python guy. I keep playing it on DC Slack because it's probably one of the easiest ways to find jobs right now in the area. Would you agree, Naveen? I mean, there's a lot of tons of postings. Now, if they're pertinent or not important, as you may learn over years of experience, is if you find a company, you can learn more about the company, and then you can go and sell yourself to the company about the job. Just because they're hiring, a junior assembly level programmer doesn't mean that they don't need a new CIO, right? Or a new manager for their Python development, whatever, right? That's a possibility. At least now you have some names, you know what they're looking for, you can get some background. Just like I had said at the beginning, everybody out there who's in the IT field should have a GitHub page. Granted, a lot of my stuff is private now. I don't do much stuff in the public or open. But that should be stuff that you can share with people, because that's really your calling card these days, specifically in the IT world. So people should stop and think. But anybody who has any other ideas, things that they're working on, like I talked about, I hacked my Alexa to add the Google not roles, skills. Yeah. So I mean, those are the things out there. Take a look at it. Feel free to share. I'm happy to send the link that I followed. The one thing that was interesting was it said download. It said go to this GitHub page, download the zip file, and then upload it to Lambda. So on GitHub, there's a thing that says download zip. I download zip, uploaded to the Lambda, not working. I start looking through the comments, and it's like, oh, yeah, no, you really need to clone it, and then you go down 3 directories, and there's a zip file there, and that's the zip file that you upload, not the GitHub zip file, right? Which was not clear from doing it. And because it said get zip file instead of clone and zip file, because if it had said clone and zip file, then I would have done find and found the zip file and shit. But yeah, those are, just certain things. Happy to answer. I mean, it's funny, I still have not gotten, who here uses Screen?
I'm sorry.
So we got one person. Screen. Yeah. The one person who spends a lot of time in front of a keyboard and not with a mouse. I still can't get myself back in the Screen. I learned about 15 years ago, something like that, and I just can't force myself to do it every day. Although I have forced myself to start using SSH and SSH add on a regular basis to manage my keys, because I do a lot of stuff in AWS. So you don't want to have to type in passwords and keys. So just sorts of things like that to make your life easier. One of the guys I work with, Sean, was showing me some of the stuff he does in the terminal and whatnot. There's so many new shortcuts. So in VI, so I use VI. I guess you have to use Vim occasionally because that's what's there. But there's all sorts of crazy stuff now where actually you can start breaking up into multiple windows, right? And so you can actually have 5, 6 windows, one giant window with 5 or 6 sub windows in it, and then one of the windows he has is a directory. So he can actually go through the directory. Okay. That's where I knew I could have 10 different, I think it's by default, I think he had 9 or 10 different windows that you can mark and move through. But when you left the window, by default, you have to save your work on it, in it. But Sean had hacked it. He had set it so that he could have all the buffers open and then just move much easier through all the windows. And then when he's done, write everything out. Totally different way to work. And so what I've learned is different workflows. And it's just because sitting next to people at the job, just asking, what are you doing there? Right? Showing some curiosity. I mean, I think maybe in the winter, having a workflow day may be interesting for people to share some of their things. I mean, the stuff that, and again, it's simply a matter, I was explaining, I'm sure we're going to see, let me look around, at least half the hands will go up. Who here knows what a trash 80 is? Okay, so I mentioned trash 80 at work. No one knows what I'm talking about. Oh, PSR 80? Radio Shack, computer?